Would you like to take roll?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Beiersdorf.
Here.
DiLorenzo.
Here.
Hanley.
Here.
Ingraham.
Here.
Jacobs.
Here.
Samarsky.
Here.
Wallach.
Here. All right, next item is approval of the agenda for tonight. Everyone's had a chance to take a look at it. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Would you like to call?
Yes. Beiersdorf.
Approve.
DiLorenzo.
Abstain.
Hanley. Ingraham.
Approve.
Jacobs.
Abstain.
Samarsky.
Approve.
Wallach.
Approve. And that was just for the agenda, so not the minutes. We're doing the minutes now.
Oh.
Yeah. You guys-
Oh, approve, 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 approve.
No,
No, approve. I was.
Approve too. Got it. Yep,
Yeah.
understand. Good catch, Chair.
Thanks. I just can't agree.
We did add that recently, so that's a
Thanks,
new
sorry.
item.
All right, so now I'm looking for a motion to approve the minutes from last month.
I'll move.
Do you have a second?
I'll second.
Call roll.
Beiersdorf.
Abstain.
DiLorenzo.
Abstain.
Hanley.
Approve.
Ingraham.
Approve.
Jacobs.
Abstain.
Samarsky.
Approve.
Wallach.
Approve. Okay. Next item is citizens wishing to discuss items not on the agenda tonight. And we don't
Have anybody on the phone or?
We did not have any call aheads, no?
Okay. Looking at the notes, it seems like we have no special matters.
Correct.
Okay, fantastic. And so we'll move to business item 7A.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chair. Tonight we have three business items. The first two are ordinances. The first one is the ordinance regarding animals in the park. The second one would be an ordinance regulating use of cannabis in public spaces. Just for your knowledge, both of those ordinances have been introduced at the council. In previous meetings, they are requesting your feedback on those two. They know that we're not taking any public comment on either, but they would like feedback on the drafted ordinance that were introduced at the council. So 7A, we'll have Mr. Kumka do that one.
Thank you, Chair Wallace, our board members. Tonight I'm going to walk you through ordinances regulating dogs at large in the city and specifically the parks. So high-level background, the Purgatory Master Plan was adopted by the City Council on June 24th of this year. The master plan identified this particular park as a very popular regional destination for folks to have their dogs off-leash. What we saw was public feedback was pretty well divided between those that feel that this is an appropriate use of the park space and those that feel it limits their enjoyment of the particular park. So based on feedback that we heard from the City Council and Park Board at a variety of meetings during this process, the city staff has prepared two draft ordinances that amend existing regulations related to off-leash dogs in the city generally and public parks in particular. So, high level, City Code Section 925.085, this relates to dogs at large throughout the city. So, at large refers to animals being off the property of a person who owns them, and that includes citywide. The current language differs from most cities' ordinances by allowing for dogs to be off-leash so long as the dog is quote-unquote at heel or under voice command. We have noted enforcement issues related to these particular phrases. The new ordinance, as written, requires dogs to be on leash. Currently, the language is a 20-foot retractable leash and dogs being brought to within 6 feet when near others. This is similar to other cities who have retractable leash sort of amendments or particulars in their ordinances. And this current draft, as written, would be effective on January 1st, 2025, if adopted by the City Council. Related specifically to animals in parks, this is Code Section 1135.020. The current language allows for dogs in quote-unquote unmaintained areas. Enforcement issues have also been documented related to this ordinance. The new ordinance, as written, requires dogs to be on leash or allowed to run off leash in designated areas, again referring to this 20-foot retractable leash particular, and that dogs have to be brought within 6 feet when near others. These designated areas would be defined by signage and/or fencing to be determined. And because this would have a potentially slower rollout due to the work group that I'll talk about in a second, the proposed effective date of this particular ordinance coming into effect would be April 1st, 2025. And this would follow the community work group recommendations. So as part of the master planning process, we heard from the park board and the city council, and we were recommended to consider putting together a resident community work group. So the mission of this group would be to develop recommendations related to a citywide dog strategy, including location options for these designated areas. This would be comprised of 9 to 15 interested residents, city staff, council, and park board members. This would be a cross-section of appointed individuals to this group. There would be options for city council or park board member to serve as a chairperson on this particular group. Representatives from city staff would include parks and public safety folks, all in the room together. We would also look for assistance from consultants that are experts in inclusive and effective community engagement, folks that do this sort of work, arrange for these meetings, and help keep the process moving forward. And this group would provide input on the designated areas within the parks related to these off-leash dog areas, so potentially signified with signage or fencing. Did you have a question?
Within parks, does that mean that other city-owned property is off the table?
Good question. Currently, this ordinance is just related to parks at this point. But the community work group is it would be tasked with tackling the issue citywide. So I would say everything's on the table, but the ordinance is related to current properties known as parks in the city.
Okay.
What are you referring, what kind of property would you be referring to, just so I understand?
I know that this wouldn't be an appropriate use because there's no parking, but the city owns space along 494 between the bike trail and the 494 right away. The long strip. That's not a park. It's city-owned property. It's not being used. So outlots.
Well, that would be under the city ordinance, that would be not allowed. Because it's isn't that right, the city ordinance?
Then can we take our magic wand out and make it a park? Because it's a dog park. I don't know. I'm just asking what we volunteered to be on that committee. I want to know what our options are. How far out of the box can we think?
What I understand that we heard is that city parcels in general would fall under this citywide dog strategy considerations.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes, sorry.
Since we did have a question, to go back a couple slides, I listened in on the city council meeting too, and the same slides were used. And I think the one thing I have an issue with retractable leashes, which I'll get to when we actually talk.
I do too.
But the presentation here and the commentary by the city council, I mean, it sounds like
Everyone needs to have a 20-foot retractable leash, because it talks about a 20-foot retractable leash when in fact the ordinance is restrained by a leash up to 6 feet or a retractable leash up to 20 feet. And I just want to, if we use this again, I think it wouldn't hurt to make that clearer, because all the council members were talking about a 20-foot retractable leash.
Yeah. Good note. So currently, both ordinances are up on Minnetonka Matters to collect resident feedback. We've been seeing a lot of comments there. The resident community group, I went through this one. And then a summary of the feedback that we're receiving on Minnetonka Matters would be provided to the November 18th City Council meeting when these ordinances would be discussed again. So the recommended action tonight would be for you folks to provide feedback to staff related to the park ordinance and the community work group, and we would then bring that information to the City Council at the November 18th meeting. So, questions or feedback? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.
I see that there's a section added about recreational trail, and if the rule is that you're either in a designated dog off-leash area or you're not, then I don't think we need to have the recreational trail section. And I'm a little sensitive to the informal trails concept because that used to be where dogs were. And so I'd be happier if that section went away.
I liked that section because I thought it made it very clear what we were talking about. I feel like that's more of like informational, here's what the definition of this is, and here's what the definition of the other thing is. I liked it.
I would agree with that. I understand Ann's point, but I do think this helps clarify the status of different trails inside the parks.
Especially because that's been an issue, is what is a trail, what is not a trail, what is maintained, what is not maintained. This makes it very clear.
Looking forward to Cullen Preserve, as I understand it, those paths are going to be city mapped or routed, and they're going to be dirt. So they're both a primary and dirt, which makes them informal, and that seems muddy.
So the ordinance edits as written, they define recreational trail to include both primary and informal trails in the earlier section 3. So it would cover both types of trails, the primary trails that we actively maintain with snow removal and the informal trails that would be city sanctioned but essentially earthen paths.
And I'm hopeful that somewhere down the line I'll have the opportunity to make a motion to say I don't want we need to control the informal trails that are made by the general public. And I don't like sanctioning them. I'll be quiet now. Sorry.
So we're saying that it's more just controlling that dogs have to be on there, it just defines it.
So the note is that by having these definitions between primary and informal trails, these were both set out in the Purgatory Master Plan and essentially allow us to determine where trails could be and their hierarchy for the most part. But both those trails would be considered maintained in this particular context.
It also helps
Doesn't
clarify
say
where
that.
the dogs can be. Right now, like the informal trails are for the most part in unmaintained informal areas. So
Yep.
the ordinance as it is, the dogs have to be on a leash everywhere in a park unless it's in a designated area. So this just clarifies that regardless if it's a dirt path or they've walked in an informal area over the path, over the years, they still have to have their dog on a leash on the informal trail as well as the formal gravel and asphalt trails.
Perhaps I hear you. I agree with you. I agree that's what it says. I think it could be written just like you said it to be more clear. Since the public is used to the informal trails being okay for dogs.
But we're saying But we're saying in the future that wouldn't be the case,
Exactly.
unless it's a designated
And I just want to
area.
make sure that that's super clear to anybody who's reading the ordinance.
We haven't developed the new language for the park rules signs, but more than likely, the park rules can be more specific to say something like, dogs must be on leash.
Everywhere.
Except in designated areas,
Yep,
Yeah.
at every park.
yep.
And that's a concise verbiage on the park rules sign that encompasses the ordinance.
Okay.
Since this is a comment, I don't think this is going to matter, but I personally am not in favor of the retractable leash. And one, because I think, as some people have commented, both at the city council meeting as well as in the Minnetonka Matters, I think it's kind of hazardous on a lot of trails. I also think you run into an issue with like the Lake Minnetonka Trail, where Three Rivers does not allow retractable leashes, but it'll sound like, because it's in Minnetonka, it's okay. So my 2 cents would be, it'd be even better if it was, always just a fixed leash. I understand that this brings us in line with other cities, but it's not a great thing.
And I agree with Dave. As a bicyclist, and I appreciate when people have their dogs on a short leash, and then when I'm biking by, they hold their dog by the collar and off to the side, presumably because they're tempted to run after bicyclists. But there have been some very painful, nasty accidents with people hitting dogs, and a 20-foot leash is pretty long.
Matt, when you said that the 20-foot leash is in line with other cities, do you have a number of like how many other cities have that in their ordinances?
I know for a fact Golden Valley has a 20-foot one.
Mhm.
Bloomington and St. Louis Park all have 20-foot. Plymouth is a 6-foot only.
Eden Prairie, I think, is 6'2", isn't it? I think it is.
I have to double check.
I would say, kind of going along the retractable leash, one of the hard things is, these leashes are leashes, right? They're sold in stores and people have them, and
I mean, I know there's pros and cons to retractable leashes, but telling people they can't, because we're already kind of limiting their ability to have the off-leash dogs, saying that, like, no, that leash is inappropriate. Like, you cannot have that leash, I think would be maybe a step too far, especially since a lot of other cities around here have that 20-foot rule. So.
I agree with Chris. They're really popular. I see them everywhere. I do think it'd be too restrictive, even though I myself personally refuse to use one because I agree there's a safety issue, but I think that should be the dog owner's
And
choice.
I'm sorry, finish. Are you done? If people actually follow the rules and they retract the leash before the dog reaches somebody else, then we're okay. It's just, if you turn away for a minute and the dog is running this way and the bicyclist or the jogger is coming this way, that space between the dog and the human can get small pretty fast. But I understand about taking away too much and having a riot.
And more fundamentally, I should have said first, I think the changes in the ordinance are positive. I think it's a good move to make. Oh, I did have one other question. And I'm not close enough, but you probably have seen it. Someone wrote in Minnetonka Matters, the language where if you had your in your neighborhood, if you had neighbors get together in someone's backyard with multiple neighbors' dogs, that the way it's written, I haven't looked at it closely enough, but they interpret it to say in that person's yard, if you're the neighbor, you would be at violation of the ordinance, not the homeowner's dog, but the neighbor's dog with the neighbor in the yard. I don't know if that's true. There was some sort of comment about that in one of these things that I thought was interesting to look at, if that's I don't think that's the intention at all.
One of the things I had a question about was kind of looking through, it says the dogs at large ordinance will start January 1st and the park regulation ordinance will start April 1st. So kind of looking at that gap in dates, does that mean there'll be like a 4-month gap where maybe people like wouldn't be able to let their dogs off leash at like Purgatory Park?
We wouldn't have recommended designated areas
Okay.
until after the 1st, but that ordinance wouldn't become effective until that point.
Okay, so would they still, like, even if the dog ordinance goes into effect January 1st, would people still be able to have their dogs off leash, like, at Purgatory Park? Or would they kind of be limited until you established that, like, or, I mean, just using it as an example, like Purgatory Park as a place where they could do it, if that's what you guys decide to do?
That's my understanding of the way
Okay.
the ordinance is written.
Wait,
now.
say, okay.
No, I don't
I
think-
also had a question about that, and can you clarify that? Can dogs run loose until April 1st then?
Yeah. In the parks.
In the
In the parks.
Oh,
So
yes.
The at-large ordinance
That's right.
is everywhere in the
Right.
city, not in a park. So
Okay.
on the streets,
Gotcha,
on a
okay.
vacant city-owned property, private property, if any part of the ordinance, of the at-large part. So the at-large part is everything except
Okay.
in the park.
So the current language of unmaintained, that
Gotcha.
would
Okay.
remain effective until April 1st.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. That's good, because that's what I was wondering. Did you have?
I would prefer that it goes into effect even if there's no designated space and the dogs are on leashes. But I understand that that again might not be too popular. I don't know if anybody else is going to back me up.
I mean, I would, if, since we're changing the rules, I would prefer like when one rule starts or stops, the other rule starts. So, like, I wouldn't want there to be a, like, if, I would want there to be something in place before we take something away.
Yeah,
So
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we've lived with Purgatory Park dogs for 30, 40 years, whatever it's been. We can probably have it be 3 months longer, between January 1st and April 1st. So
I can try.
that's just my point of view.
And I just had another, and this is more of just like a language thing and maybe a clarification thing in, God, it's so hard to look at on my phone. In section 3, bullet E, it says, no person may allow a domestic animal under his or her responsibility to, that part makes sense. Engage in conduct tending reasonably to disturb is just kind of awkward. And I feel like it leaves a lot of ambiguity kind of with that. Like what does it take to disturb somebody? Like just the presence of a dog? Like does the sound of a dog, the look of a dog? So I don't know if we're going to have something, I mean, because before we took out harass or interfere with. So that's a little more concrete, but it's still very, like, you could be like, your dog's disturbing me because it's ugly. Like, I don't know. So I feel like maybe just clarifying that or kind of changing the language around that.
The second part of that, the red text. So no person may allow a domestic animal under his or her responsibility to harass any park visitor or park employee or interfere with the park visitor's property.
Mhm. Okay, so the harass part's still in there.
Why do you need both sentences?
Sorry, I
They seem
missed
very
that.
similar. The two sentences seem very similar in E.
It's just, I think it tries to clarify a little bit it kind of replaces the harass or interfere with a little more language.
Yeah.
How about, no person may allow a domestic animal under his or her responsibility to disturb any park visitor or park employee, period. And then, so
That's what
take
that-
out the in conduct tending reasonably to.
Is that like a legal term?
City attorney did draft
Okay.
these.
so yeah. Okay.
I mean, I would agree with Chris that I think the word disturb is very broad. And yes, the second sentence does give it a little more clarity of harassing or interfering, but putting that word in there first leaves room for interpretation.
Sure.
So it might be better to have that word,
Well,
have a
and-
different word in place of
And
that.
reasonably is also a measure that
Right.
can vary greatly. So those two words together kind of make it unclear.
I do think disturbance is pretty personal. My tolerance for a dog approaching me is pretty low. You know, my personal space bubble is pretty big. And other people, maybe, you know, their personal space bubble is 6 inches. So my level of disturbance would be higher.
I think that illustrates the point though that's super unclear. Some people would be like, oh, the dog's near me, it doesn't bother me at all, and for some people it does. So I feel like reasonably disturb is super gray, where that underlined is no person may allow a domestic animal under her or his responsibility to harass any park visitor. I just think you need the underlined. I think the other stuff just convolutes it more, just you can't harass other people with your dogs. If somebody says, I don't like it, your dog's too close to me, that's the level. Move them away. I feel like the other stuff gets a little gray.
Harass may be, I mean, just to be devil's advocate, harass and disturb are both subjective. If I'm feeling disturbed or harassed, shouldn't I have the right to ask the owner to please move your dog away from me?
I feel like that's right. I feel like if you ask something and then someone continued to do it, that's harassment to me. So maybe that's like my,
Okay.
you know, like if you set a boundary of like, I'm uncomfortable, and then they disregarded it and kept doing it. I don't know if there's a legal definition of harassment, but that's like that level for me of like, I said stop or I'm uncomfortable, and then it continued. And then there's like clarity. But I don't know if that's the right word. Maybe it's not. I agree. It could be subjective too.
I tend to agree with Bella, though. I don't think that first sentence is necessary. I do feel like the second sentence makes it very clear and is a stronger sentence. I think the first sentence is too open to interpretation.
Simpler is usually better.
My next comment's maybe a recommendation for when you bring it to city council with community members in attendance. A slide with the rationale why we're even doing this, right? We had a lot of feedback in the Purgatory project in the Purgatory Master Plan project about safety and issues with safety and dogs. There are other reasons why we're making these changes. Maybe summarize that first so it's coming with good rationale behind it.
Especially the part around the city at large. Because I know at least one of the council members, based on other events that have happened in the metro area with dogs and attacks, that I know one of the council members from our joint meeting sounded concerned about liability by not having some more control there. At large, in the city, not the parks per se.
And I just had one more thought, and I just wasn't even sure if this was like appropriate with.
And this one of the things that had come up with the comments was for the people along the park, were dogs running into their property. So, and I don't know if this is covered anywhere else in the ordinances or if it wouldn't be even covered in there, but just putting it somewhere like it's not allowed to have your dog like go into somebody else's property. I don't know how that would go, but I know that had come up a little bit with people that live along the park. So,
Unless they're invited.
like vampires.
Ah.
Does anyone have anything else?
It may have been perfectly clear, but I'm delighted that staff and city council have said, there won't be dogs running wild everywhere. So thank you.
Chair, can I step in? Just
Yeah,
at the
absolutely. Go
council
ahead.
meeting when Matt presented this and introduced it, the two comments that the council members had were really regarding the retractable leashes and then the dates. So
Yep.
we've heard a little bit. Just want to make sure there's no other comments on those two issues. I know they made a comment about even getting feedback on the retractable leashes for sure. So and we've heard from a few people. Just now's the time if you have any other comments on leashes and or the two different dates for the two different ordinances.
Would it be possible to institute both of them starting whenever the at-large starts and immediately institute the temporary dog parks within the hockey rinks, and once it's winter and the nets are down, in the tennis courts?
That seems like it might be hard for the city to accomplish in a month.
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
I think that might be hard for the city to accomplish in a month. I mean, we're saying that the at-large ordinance goes into effect on January 1st. So that's basically giving the city a month and change to figure out how to implement that. So I feel like we might want to give them some time to get this going.
And part of that, I think, is driven by an ordinance change requires lead time. So, I mean, I don't even know if they can vote on this at the next meeting and pass it, can they? Or does it still go out another step?
Yeah, no, I believe the November 18th meeting they can pass the
They
ordinance.
can pass
They did
it.
introduce it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think there'd be another level of issue there if we're something like,
These are dog parks. If we say, you can only bring your dog to the rinks. I feel like that's a whole nother issue that, needs to be brought up, because then it would be establishing dog parks, which we haven't done as a city.
Well, it'd be
Yeah, and
temporary dog parks maybe, to say, in the interim.
even temporary though, then it's introducing something and it gets kind of convoluted to say, this is your 3 month, but then you can move to a different area and then you can't do this. And
That's true. That might be confusing.
I think it's a good idea to think about that. I think it would be challenging, and I'm kind of looking at Darren. Just the logistics of that, I think, might be challenging to do.
I think it's probably a better idea to make sure that the ordinances are very clear and everybody's figured out exactly what they should say before we start implementing temporary things. We should just have everything set one time, change everything, and then it's just good to go.
And one other thing, I think from a communication perspective, it wouldn't hurt to reinforce the dialogue I think we had here that said that from January 1st to April 1st, nothing changes at Purgatory. Because I think that's not real clear. Or maybe, because I can tell from some of the Minnetonka Matters comments, you're already getting some of that perspective.
Is there time between now and April 1st to create and fence a dog park? I think not.
we could create designated areas identified via maps and signage, but we wouldn't be able to install fencing over the winter.
If we had a winter like last winter, possibly.
Yeah.
Don't count on that one. But we would have the ability to put signage or have ways to designate areas, and nothing necessarily right now says that any designated areas are necessarily going to be fenced. So I think it was in the report, we kind of had an and/or
Mhm.
provide
Mhm.
off-leash areas or signage or
Or
fencing
fencing.
by April 1st. So kind of gives, just depending on what the weather is or what can be done given however spring goes.
And fencing may not be needed depending on where it is
Mm-hmm.
and how good the humans are at keeping track of where their dogs are.
Are we talking about the working group at this session too, or that's different? We are? Okay, but we're not getting to that yet.
That would happen after the next direction from the city council. We would begin forming this group.
Okay. So that's not a lot of time between November 18th and,
Relatively short window, making recommendations to the council at their March meeting.
okay.
How early in March?
The council has 2 meetings, the 2 Mondays, so whatever that third Monday is, I wouldn't know the date.
So they have a week to designate areas then? If they're not deciding until end of March?
Well, the community work group would start.
No, but I
Right
mean,
away.
they have to agree to it.
They
right?
would, yeah. So maybe February we'd present a draft, get feedback, and then final version in
Okay.
March. Keep it moving.
Okay.
How are the working group people going to be chosen?
We're going to work with the consultant on that particular process. So that's part of the feedback that we're looking for tonight. If you have any considerations of how we'd go through that process, we're open to hear them.
I do have a couple thoughts. The Friends of Minnetonka Parks perhaps would want to nominate or put forward someone or two, and then there's that Pause for Parks for Parks, or
That's
whoever. I don't know how structured that group is, but there were definitely people at some of those meetings where we got all the feedback that said they wanted to be involved.
And I've communicated with them. They've had
Okay.
pickup events in the park. They're quite organized.
Organized enough to push a couple people towards this.
Well, I don't think you have to push.
Yeah.
And then another thought was folks that have commented during the master plan process that maybe are near the park or had opinions, but a broader range of interests beyond the dogs.
Near Purgatory?
Well, we're talking citywide, so
Right,
we do
okay.
have feedback from Minnetonka Matters related to citywide ordinances.
Okay,
as well.
good. I don't want, I would like us to be broad in our idea about where the dog park is, that it isn't necessarily going to be a chunk of Purgatory.
I think given the work group's small time frame really to make a lot happen, maybe the consultants could help really create some clear objective goals. I just think there's going to be a lot of people with different opinions coming in, and I think it's got to be super structured. This is the end goal for this meeting. Let's make that happen. This is the end goal for this meeting, because I worry it could get in the weeds really quick, and then the date gets pushed, everything gets pushed. So I would just maybe ask for support through the park staff or a consulting group to be super clear with the objectives of each meeting.
We've had multiple interviews with firms that do this work in advance. We'd have more particulars after the council directs us.
I was gonna ask about that. What type of groups are you looking at that are facilitating?
They are engagement coordinating firms, companies that specifically host groups of various interests to try to reach a compromise on public policy related issues.
There's a citizen, Angela Morera, sent me information about from the Trust for Public Land about how to set up a dog park, sort of a template, and some information from the city of Ann Arbor, their whole plan, how they went through to pick where it was going to be. There's some placement criteria chart, a certain number of points for parking and that kind of stuff. And a chart about, I don't know how old this is, other cities and sizes of their dog parks and whether they charge or not. So there's quite a bit of good stuff I can forward to anybody who's interested.
Great, yes.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else?
Move on to item 7B.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that. We'll pull up the presentation. Item 7B is the, we're looking for feedback on another ordinance. It's the ordinance regulating use of cannabis in public spaces. Some of you may remember legislation in 2023 passed the legalization of recreational use of cannabis. It was kind of I think it was maybe a surprise to some people. And so, within that legalization, the state did retain control over a number of regulatory areas, but did give local jurisdictions like cities the discretion to regulate use in what they're calling outdoor public spaces. So really there's two different avenues that we can go by. We've got the public use and then we've got the retail. So, how do you handle it in the public, and then how do you actually handle it? Are you licensing it? Are you regulating growing, things like that? So you as the park board have, purview over the park system, so we'll look at the public use and city properties. Timeline with this one, the city staff presented this back to the council in 2023. It went out for public engagement for probably about, I think it was 4 or 5 months over 23 into early 24, and then I've come back to the city council a couple times, just giving them information about it. It's been kind of a hot topic. It's been on and off. I wouldn't say it's a hot topic in the fact that we're hearing a lot of stories from the public. I think it's just, you hear it in the news, and especially when it came out in 2023, we heard a lot about that. The ordinance was introduced in October. They are sending it to the Planning Commission for that other piece that I was talking about. That will go tomorrow, and then you're here tonight, obviously, to review the public space piece. So this will, again, go back to the City Council November 18th. They're just looking for your feedback on the draft ordinance. And really, I just pulled the chart out of the report. I think this is the easiest thing to look at and discuss and give feedback on. So if you see on the left side here of the chart, it says uses allowed or not allowed. So the first one is no use of cannabis products, including lower potency hemp edible products, allowed. The ordinance applies the same geographic limitation to use of tobacco-related products. In other words, no use of any kind, smoking, vaping, ingesting. So no use at all. And then where it's affected, on the right side you see within 50 feet of any city-maintained outdoor swimming beach, playground, other outdoor facility used for sports or athletics, park shelter, warming house, refreshment stand, or public restroom. So that's that first one, is kind of no use. Next one down is no smoking or vaping of cannabis and hemp-derived products. On the right, excuse me, on any city park property, including trails located within the park property, and on any part of a property upon which a city-operated building is located. So again, this is just smoking or vaping. So the kind of the distinction here is like, what do you think about edibles, right? That's the distinction here. So, smoking or vaping, city-owned park property, including the trails within that park property, and then on any property where we have a city-operated building. And then bottom, no prohibition, therefore no smoking, vaping, or eating are allowed. Anywhere else which include. What was that?
You said no smoking, vaping, or eating, but they are
They are allowed, yes, I'm sorry. Therefore, smoking, vaping, eating are allowed. I apologize. So anywhere else, city sidewalks, trails located outside of city parks, that would be allowed. So really those are the three: not allowed anywhere, or no use, smoking and vaping, and then allowed. So curious if you guys have any feedback on that. The ordinance was in your packet. We just tried to make it plain language, because this is a kind of a complicated topic, to be honest. We have policies for alcohol in parks, for tobacco in parks, things like this. It's similar but not exactly identical, so I think there's a few differences, and so it is a little bit confusing. So we're trying to make it as plain language as we possibly can. So open for feedback, questions that I may or may not be able to answer. Sarah might be able to help. Captain Meehan might be able to help too.
And this just may not be part of the city, maybe part of like the school district, but like schools, would they be in there?
I assume schools have their own enforcement
They have
on
their
their
own,
Okay.
no smoking, no tobacco,
Okay.
no
Correct.
marijuana or cannabis products.
Yes, sir.
So just a curiosity, I'm looking at the second one. So the property upon which a city-operated building is located, so just like here, is the entire, what's the property right around this building? The entire area?
The whole Civic
follow
Center
me?
campus?
Civic Center campus, yeah, so the building is not a park, we're in
No,
Civic
I understand
Center
it's not a park, but it's a city-owned building.
Correct,
So like across the street between here and the marsh,
yep.
where does that fall?
That's a Civic Center
I
park.
think that's a park, yeah, I think that's within the park.
That's a park, okay. So it is part of the park.
I would
So,
have to look at the boundaries, but I believe so.
and
yes.
and the boardwalk between here and Jadana is part of the park over the
Yes.
wetlands? Okay, I was just trying to figure out if there's some sort of
Right, I know there's,
nether area.
there's a lot of one-offs that you're
Yeah,
trying to think
yeah.
about, and so it's,
So if I'm on the bridge going over the creek over here, that's still in the park?
or,
It'd be depending on the definition of the I think we call out uses on trails,
Yeah, you
'Cause
can't use
the-
that trail.
because it would apply to a trail.
Okay,
'Cause
I was
it's
kind of
the-
curious.
There's part of that trail going to Jadana is on private property and we have easement. So there's part of that trail is not in
Oh.
Jadana Park or the Civic Center Park.
So we need to have a sign there that, with a little ashtray.
I think there's gonna be a lot of those little things
Yeah,
that.
I was just kind
we're
of
not-
curious.
It probably happen, right now, for alcohol, you have to have a permit to be in certain parks, at shelters, things like that. That doesn't mean that people aren't having alcohol. I think we're trying to
Right.
bring this with a broad brush, and I know there's probably little one-offs that we're probably not gonna be able to address.
Thanks.
In the unlikely event that there's a dog park in a space that's not a city park, but it's city-owned property, and there's no building, then by this, it seems like there would be no prohibition. And I would propose that a dog park be no smoking.
Well, wouldn't a dog, if we came up with a new novel designated area, like along 494, at that point, we would probably call that a city park.
If we
Have
can,
that option, yeah.
Yeah.
we can use our magic wand and make it a park.
I think you'd want to have it be designated as something if it's going to be a designated dog area.
Yeah, the city can create, we'll be creating a new park, Cullen Preserve isn't technically a park yet,
Okay.
so, but it will be a park. We have in the CIP where we got the land donated on Timberline where they had the private tennis court, so that will become a park. So
Okay.
we have options to add parks to the city's
Okay.
park
And
system.
I understand what
Okay.
you're saying, it's not in that definition on the top right. That's what you're looking for, where those are more areas where we were thinking kids would be. I think that's kind of the common denominator for that definition of the top right was, playgrounds,
Well,
sports, athletics,
I'm-
things like that.
I don't think if you're trying to handle a dog, your hands shouldn't be busy smoking. So that's more, and you should be focused on the dog, not in outer space, so. For safety reasons. I'm done.
Sorry, separate question. Is there anything on this slide that's divergent or different than our tobacco laws that I don't have memorized?
Darren, do you have any comments on
Yes, but I don't want to get it wrong.
Really minor?
Smoking cannabis basically falls into everything smoking tobacco related. If there could be some differences with edibles,
Yeah.
I was going to
that's
ask
different
that.
than smoking tobacco.
Because, is tobacco chew allowed at parks right now? You can't have any of that form. Because I was just going to say to be consistent. Do you know what I'm saying? If you're saying tobacco is this way, then I think it should be treated the exact same way. Is that fair? Or do you think it's different?
I think we'd have to get back to you with,
Yeah, that's a tough
I mean,
one.
is that wrong?
Um,
You know, if you're having two of those zings, whatever the kids, not kids, what other people use in their, like, I don't know what they're called, they're like little white tobacco, I don't know what they're called.
Sure.
But, you know, like, is it being consistent across the board? I don't really know fully, but what each one is, but.
So the middle one, where we say no smoking or vaping, so we don't, the park policy on tobacco doesn't allow tobacco in the parks.
At
right?
all.
But the middle one would say
You could
you
use
could
edibles.
use an edible if you were on a trail in a park, as long
How
as you
would
weren't
they-
50 feet from
Okay.
one of those.
And that enforcement, like, are we just hoping our best that you'd find somebody and look at them and say, like, are you okay?
We would basically have to get a call that someone.
Okay, is like,
sees
that,
it
that's what I was gonna
happening.
say, because I'm like, how are you gonna?
It's very
you-
difficult to differentiate.
Yeah, okay.
And Captain Mina, have we had many issues with this in the city, or?
I'm not aware of any calls that we've had regarding issues in the parks or
I can't
otherwise
imagine.
regarding cannabis use.
Right. So like I said, it's been kind of a hot topic, yet maybe not practically in our parks.
I do think
ahead
it's
of time,
smart
so-
to have something in writing ahead of time, though, before this comes, so
Right.
people have really clear expectations. Yeah.
I was biking 2 weeks ago somewhere in Minneapolis, and someone went by in a cloud of cannabis smoke. I don't think he was actively smoking at the time, but it hadn't been that long ago. But I've not experienced that in Minnetonka.
And I think we don't want that, like
No, we
outside of
don't.
our city building, we don't want,
Yes.
that's.
But that was just on a trail, so that would be no prohibition.
If it was just not in a park trail, correct.
Yeah,
Yep, that is correct.
okay.
I didn't think we would be talking about this a couple of years ago. I never knew we would be talking about smoking cannabis in parks, but.
Does anyone have any other feedback?
Like I said, it's been a really tough
Yeah.
to try, taking
Oh,
all
yeah.
the feedback too from and what's practical, when we talk to enforcement, how are we going to
Yeah.
enforce things? It's challenging, and so I think we have edited this quite a few times
Mhm.
and took some feedback from residents and council members, and so again, we're looking for your feedback,
Yep.
but we think it's
I think it
a
looks
pretty
good.
good start too.
To me, it seems reasonable, given all the things that we've talked about.
I think it's really clear.
Okay. We can move on to item 7C.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chair. Item 7C is park habitat restoration and maintenance plans for Meadow, Orchard, and Lake Rose Parks. Is that Leslie?
Yeah, I'll just
Sounds good.
take it quick. So thank you, Chair Wallach and Park Board members. I'll just start briefly, actually, and then I'm going to turn it over to Matt to walk through some of these. But if you recall, I just want to remind everybody, in 2021, the City Council, the Park Board reviewed and the City Council adopted our Natural Resources Master Plan. And in that plan, it laid out a strategy related to habitat restoration in our parks. There was a part of the plan actually prioritized parks. So we had some criteria developed so we could actually put some more prioritization on where we're putting our efforts into. And then part of the other strategy identified in the plan is to develop what we call park habitat restoration and maintenance plans. So these are more kind of granular, more specific habitat restoration plans in our parks that will guide our restoration efforts over time. Part of the outcome of the master plan was also a new CIP page, so Capital Improvement Program page, that actually sets funding aside for habitat restoration in parks. And so one of the, sort of what we've done, and you've seen some of these starting last year, before we actually spend money doing more intensive or aggressive restoration in a park, we want to make sure we have a plan. And so these plans that we're developing now and bringing to the park board for feedback will become the basis for the work going forward, whether it's by staff or volunteers or contractors. So this is sort of that first stage leading to more intensive restoration in these parks. So right now we have plans for Meadow, Orchard Park, and Lake Rose Park. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt. He was instrumental along with other natural resource staff, and he's going to kind of do a high-level walkthrough, and certainly if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Can I ask you a question about the CIP first?
Sure.
So the planning and restoration funding, will there also be line items for the ongoing maintenance?
It actually includes maintenance.
Okay.
Long-term. So when we, from the perspective of the CIP and those funds that are in there, the funds are intended to fund kind of really intensive effort or sort of initial stage of restoration, but we do have built in ongoing maintenance funds that are kind of carrying over from year to year, so we can make sure we're supporting the maintenance needs of the parks, which should lessen over time as we get habitat, plant communities more established.
I'm just thinking about as some of the bigger parks get restored,
right?
And then we've got, so there's that maintenance layer, and then more restoration of the smaller parks, and it gets. I just don't want it to be such a big pile of stuff that all that hard work starts to erode.
So if you look in the Natural Resources Master Plan, I believe it's Appendix B, there's actually a 20-year time frame where initial restoration activities are outlined and the costs, and then the ongoing maintenance as it's carried forward year after year.
Okay.
So that is built into the CIP, the 5-year CIP program. And then just to remind the Park Board, Natural Resources Division, we do have an operating budget. We have a line item for habitat restoration for the maintenance activities. And so we also have that kind of pot of money that we can use for restoration or for maintenance. So I'll turn it over to Matt, and he's going to walk through these.
Thank you so much. Last year I presented restoration and maintenance plans for Purgatory and Hilloway Park, and we've been having very successful results with the restoration
and
happening.
Ford Park.
And Ford Park. And
which we
Ford Park,
visited.
of course, Ford Park, can't forget. And these plans really represent sort of a synthesis of our resources available to us. We have staff in the field doing this work. We have a very robust, amazing group of volunteers. And then we also have contracted dollars. So we'll work with the local specialists that do this work, and we roll them out into the parks and start prioritizing these particular restoration efforts. So these restoration and maintenance plans present a sort of a high-level vision for each one of these parks. They sort of serve as a higher-level planning and management tool for our staff and volunteers, help direct those efforts to meet some of these prioritization goals. What we end up doing is identifying restoration management areas, sort of slice and dice the parks into areas where we think the effort would be appropriate based on, is there a desirable plant community that's worth enhancing or growing? Is there a mature tree canopy that we want to protect? Considerations like that. We consider these living documents. Restoration is not like a typical engineering project where we can cost out linear feet of this particular pipe and know exactly what we're getting. Restoration is a bit of a process. There's seasonality, rain, drought, heat, seed effectiveness. There's a lot of sort of mushiness to these particular efforts. So we like to consider these documents as living, and they'll evolve as we see restoration and maintenance activities sort of respond in the field. We want to leverage the volunteer community early and often. We let folks near the park know, as per our normal outreach process, we're going to be working in these parks. We let all the people around the parks know, but then we outreach to the sort of the citywide volunteer community, let them know there's going to be additional opportunities. We're going to be doing cool restoration in these parks, and it's maybe worth going and checking out. And then these documents sort of function as a larger scale communication tool to the folks around the park, hopefully get them in, see these restorations, see their tax dollars at work, and seeing the parks generally enhance. What we do with these documents is we identify what we call target plant communities. I won't get into the weeds literally on these, but what we're trying to do is generally describe a sort of an ideal plant community These are sort of customized for Minnetonka. We live in, the Anthropocene, where humans have affected our landscape so greatly: foot traffic, invasive weeds, climate change adaptability. So we're sort of using the latest ecological research when it comes to restoration strategies and what the professionals are doing in the field, and we're considering that when we target plant communities and sort of create a to-do list to get us to that point, ideally. So again, these sort of understanding the pressures of these park spaces, understanding that they are for humans. Our real goal is to get people out into the park spaces as much as possible, using this restoration as a potential sort of draw to have folks come and see this work. And what we end up doing is identifying this target plant community and customizing a variety of management units throughout that park. So the 3 parks I'll show tonight sort of offer a variety of detailing when it comes to these target plant communities. For instance, Meadow Park is a rather large park, but it is primarily cattail marsh and wetland. And we really are considering upland restorations with these efforts, knowing that cattail and reed canary grass and some of the wetland-specific weeds are very expensive to manage and are sort of a Sisyphean task to some degree. So we target on upland areas. So in Meadow, this particular work area that you see in blue is sort of on the northwest side of the park. We would be building off very effective and amazing volunteer restoration areas just to the east of this. We like to consider priority areas being very high visibility. It doesn't make sense for us to go back into the corner of the park in most cases unless it's a very sort of special remnant ecosystem. In this particular case, there are beautiful large mature oaks and sort of a mixed canopy in this area that run along the trails. It's really quite spectacular. But what we'd be doing here is leveraging the sort of proven buckthorn removal techniques that we've identified over the last few years. Not just us, the restoration community, throughout the state has been sort of streamlining the process, and we have generally a 2-year process to get the buckthorn out of there and some native species coming in on the ground plane. And this would be a very high visibility location. A lot of people walk this trail. It would also be very practical for us to get contractors in there to get the brush off site to do the particulars of that restoration work. Yes, Dave?
The deck talks about 7 acres. Is the 7 acres the blue area you're talking about, or that whole space?
This blue area.
This blue, that's good.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So it's substantial.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of topography in there that adds challenges. So being a living document, we would go in and more granularly assess where we would tackle the buckthorn to complete loss, where would we sort of nibble at the edges, doing as much as we possibly can with those CIP dollars. Orchard Park, this is a neighborhood-sized park, one of the smaller ones, but it does have quite a high-quality fen floating bog on the west side of this park. It's really an important, amazing plant community. Again, it's highly accessible with a primary trail that runs around some very significant large oaks. We would identify a mixed savanna here as a target plant community, sort of keeping the canopy of these oak trees and then opening the ground plane from invasive species and getting more pollinator and forbs and perennial grasses on the ground plane. This is sort of a good example of what Minnetonka has a lot of, these neighborhood-sized parks with sort of a smattering of variety of impacted plant communities. So just the pressures of invasive weeds and erosion and land use over the decades have sort of led us to have this kind of mix of plant communities, not just a single one across most parks. We also consider what ongoing maintenance would look like in these particular efforts. So not just planning for something that would be very, cost-effective initially, but then would allow us to manage in the long term. For instance, targeting prescribed burning as a management technique proves to be a very cost-effective way to manage for weeds in the future. And finally, Lake Rose Park. very amazing restoration efforts have gone on in this particular park over the last decade or so. We would develop a target plant community and strategies to sort of, we're in this unique situation where this park is generally clear of buckthorn, so new challenges begin to pop up. There are aggressive native plants that are sort of seeing the disturbance of the buckthorn being gone. So we at Lake Rose would try to pioneer some new techniques to get rid of some of these aggressive native species. For instance, black cherry is a native tree, very good pollinator habitat, but sometimes it can act like buckthorn to some degree, where it can come up very, very densely and outcompete anything on the ground plane, and then sort of become a wound to some degree for other invasive weeds to come in. So at Lake Rose, we would try out some management techniques of these aggressive native species. And this is a perfect example of a spot where we could establish a plant community that's fire tolerant and look at prescribed burning in the future to manage weeds through here. So that's it for those 3 particular parks. We're looking for feedback from you folks on the restoration and maintenance plans for Meadow, Orchard, and Lake Rose Park. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the presentation.
You get my mind's always blown at the sheer amount of detail that goes into these things. So I think it all looks awesome. I have no constructive feedback beyond it looks great. So
Thank you.
Does anyone have any feedback?
I just
Questions?
have one comment on the Lake Rose map. You can go back to that.
Yes.
First, I think it's fantastic what's happened in there. I like that you laid it for the plan. In the upper right-hand corner of the mixed deciduous woodlands plan, you're going to be doing work in there too? Because I know the homeowners right next to that have had issues in the past with people working in their backyard thinking it's part of that. So whatever you can do to make sure you demarc where the park territory is and where their property is, would probably be appreciated by them.
Absolutely. And part of the outreach for this, I did speak with the homeowners on that side, and it is pretty commonly used by the local neighborhood folks to walk through there. It is quite disturbed, though. There is utility corridor through there, so it's less of a high quality, but certainly because of the amount of foot traffic, we would do some restoration through that area, but working with those local property owners.
There, let's see, this is the Orchard one. In late April, there was going to be, to early May, garlic mustard, motherwort, and stick seed spot spraying. I wasn't aware that is that what the contractors have done in other places? I'm mostly familiar with pulling it.
So in certain locations, it's very effective for us to either do the spraying ourselves or hire the contractors to do that spraying safely. In areas where these weeds are very, very aggressive, it's impractical, frankly, to hand pull a lot of these. So we follow the regulations. We understand that there's concerns about herbicide applications, so the professionals, either from our staff or contracted ones, are very thoughtful. They post notifications appropriately. We communicate that to the general public to, keep their dogs off of those areas, but we see it as a necessary tool in our toolbox.
So these are areas where there's not a lot of other good stuff. It's mostly bad stuff.
That's the concern, is in a larger scale herbicide application, are you killing desirable plants by accident? So no, we were very thoughtful, and we certainly work with the contractors or our staff that these folks need to know what they're applying that herbicide to. Yes, there's going to be some accidental loss, part of the process, but it's a chemotherapy for cancer to some degree. We need to make a mess sometimes.
Yeah. Is from a doing work and maintenance, is it an issue that there's so many different plant communities in a fairly small space?
Not in a park like this because there are very clear designations. For instance, some of these defining lines are trails, and it just so happens that the the tree canopy changes for whatever reason. There was earthwork on this side of the trail, not on that side of the trail. So there's oaks over here, but there's no oaks over here. So that these are done by our amazing professionals. Go out there, Janet Van Sloan, in the field, figuring out what these plant communities ideally would be like in the future.
Okay,
So sort of based on what's there.
So you and the staff have no concerns about the jigsaw puzzle being too...
This is for us. This is if the general public goes out there and they're curious and want to know about these plant communities, great. But we see this as sort of a practical, how do we hand this off to our seasonal staff or a contractor, and they generally get a sense of what we're talking about.
Okay.
So just to kind of close this off, we realize these are very technical plans, and they really are meant to guide city staff who are working with volunteers and contractors. But we also will be completing these for other parks, so you'll continue to see these over time. As I said, these are meant to lay the groundwork for future efforts, and so we want to make sure we have them in place before we do a lot of intensive restoration in a park. So you'll see more of these, and we are, the CIP, the Capital Improvement Program, sort of lays out a schedule for these parks, and so we're generally following that schedule. But also recognize these are living documents, as Matt said, so it's not, once you see it here, it's not written in stone. We use adaptive management principles, so we may do something on the land, and it may respond differently than what we're prescribing here, so we're always going back and adjusting as needed. So.
I think they seem great. Given what I've watched happen over at Purgatory, it seems like, variations on a theme here, and so it all seems reasonable to me.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate it. And Leslie.
Do you need some sort of motion saying two thumbs up?
Two thumbs up.
Oh, it's just feedback.
Just feedback. And and part of that is because they are living documents. We don't want to approve something that has the connotation it's a static thing. It's going to always be changing. We just want to make sure the park board is seeing it. You're aware of what we're doing. It's a communication tool, and then it's something that helps us guide the work that we're doing in the future.
I think it's great, and I love the part that there's multiple years and the maintenance. I walk around Starring Lake sometimes, and I know that they have 3 times tried to get rid of their buckthorn, and it's a buckthorn forest again. And I know that's, as you mentioned, the restoration community understands better how to deal with buckthorn now. Each year somebody figures out some new thing. So I'm very hopeful that once we stamp it out, it'll be under control.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. We can move on to reports from staff.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chair. First one, 8A, would be information items. Sarah's going to take the first, and I believe Leslie's got the second. Leslie.
Good evening, Park Board. I'm just going to give a little update on the Burwell Spectacular. It took place on Friday, October 25th from 5 to 7:30 at the Burwell House or Minnetonka Mills Park. We had over 1,400 people. We've lucked out with some good weather. Last year it was very cold. This year it was cool but not awful. So if you haven't been to that event, it's free to the public. There's a lot of children's activities, but a lot of the families come dressed up from head to toe, parents included, and it's kind of like a Hallmark movie there, to be honest. It's such a beautiful park, and it's a nice way to highlight it. Let me just pull up the photos, if you haven't looked at those. So we take some photos. It does get dark during this event, and that kind of leads me to it. In recreation, we often have the ideas, but we're very fortunate to have departments within the city that help us put these on. And I don't know if I've publicly said enough how great, like, Darren's park staff is. So to light up this entire park, it's an all-day effort to go out, and his staff and our building staff and our park staff help us get this all set up. So there's lights kind of sprinkled throughout the entire park so that people are safe and have a good experience there. We had our police department there this year. They did a trunk or treat. Our fire department participates. Our police also go out and help with traffic control. So just another reminder that it's a full city effort to put these on, and I sometimes forget how fortunate we are in recreation to rely on our other departments to make these great events work, because a lot goes on in the background. So just wanted to give a little shout out to all the other departments, but really fun event. This is maybe one of my favorite that we do, just because the parents get into it and everybody has a really good time, and it was a great success again. So.
Like, how many people did you guys have last year, if you remember?
I think last year was lower because it was very cold.
Okay.
Like below 30,
Sure.
and I want to say maybe we said 900.
Okay.
I believe the year before was around 1250.
Okay.
And the only way we really know our numbers for this one is Kathy, who helps with the Burwell, the tours of the house, because she manages that program in the summer. They have a clicker of the number of people that come through the house, and we know not everyone goes through the house here, because when they come Yaki year to year, they've seen it. So she had over 1,250, I think, come through the house.
wow.
So we know there were at least that many there.
Sure.
So.
Nice.
Very well attended. Fun to see the young families in the city come out and enjoy it.
I would say, as someone who lives in the neighborhood behind the Burwell House, I really appreciate that the police put out signs that say don't park in our neighborhood, because I can imagine it would.
We
get
learned
really
the
crazy
first
there.
year the hard way.
Yeah, I bet.
That we didn't know how big the crowd would be. We partner with St. David's and have permission to use their parking lot. But the very first year was 4 or 5 years ago, and we did not put out the signs, and it was a hazard. Just you couldn't get an emergency vehicle because there was just such a big crowd that we didn't anticipate. So we learn when we put on events. You do learn every year. So, yes. And with that, I don't have any other comments. The next one is, I think I'll turn it over to Leslie.
Yes, so this is just a really brief update on the Community Forest Management Plan. If you recall, I think it was last spring, we brought some ideas to you. And I'm sure you've been waiting with bated breath to learn more about this plan, but unfortunately it has been delayed. We just got a rough draft from our consultant. So at the last time, I think we said it would probably be coming back to the park board this fall. It looks like it'll be probably early next year, so hopefully January or February. We do have a Minnetonka Matters website, our webpage, dedicated to the plan, so if you are interested, or if anyone's interested in learning more, they can certainly go there. We're keeping that updated in terms of the timeline, but it has been delayed, so I apologize. But it will be coming.
Cool. Thank you.
Which then leads me, Chair, into 8B, which is the upcoming meeting schedule. Next scheduled meeting is Wednesday, December 4th. As Leslie mentioned, likely having the Community Forest Management Plan, back here in January or February. Down below, we've got a lot of stuff going on right now in our park system. On the weekends, so Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we have sauna in the parks at Shady Oak Beach. So we've got a sauna, and then people can reserve spots, hour-and-a-half spot. I think we have 500 reservations already through the end of November. So it's been very busy. An hour-and-a-half slot in which you can go in the sauna, and then some decide to go in the lake. I think the lake temp's in the 50s right now, so the water's getting colder. So I think a couple weeks ago it was actually kind of nice. It was refreshing, but now it's getting pretty chilly. But I think that's part of the experience is going from the sauna to the water. So that's been busy. We've got a couple winter farmers markets. The first one here is Saturday, this Saturday. Second one was in December. We've got Light Up the Commons. That'll be the second year of that out at Ridgedale Commons. And then we'll have our Yeti Hunt, which I think we're probably in our 4th or 5th year of the Yeti Hunt that happens kind of over the New Year's between the holidays. And this year will be at Victoria Evergreen Park.
Okay.
That's all I have.
Cool. Park board member reports.
I wasn't here last month when you guys did the park signage stuff, but I've been seeing them out in the wild, and I just think the park signs look amazing.
They do.
So, really cool.
Okay. We are at that time. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, make a motion to adjourn.
I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.